Welcome back to the second episode of the JMP podcast. Today we're going to talk about a variety of things, starting with my crazy experience with Adobe services over the past 2 years. So let's get into it. First off, let's start the story about 2 years ago when I signed up for Adobe. Now, at the time, I needed a commercial plan for what I was doing. I needed multiple clients, all that kind of stuff. So I signed up for a commercial plan with all of Creative Cloud. Now, at the time, I really wanted to use all of Creative Cloud services. I wanted to use Illustrator for graphic design, and I wanted to use After Effects and maybe even Premiere or Audition. So I wanted all of Creative Cloud, and especially Lightroom and Lightroom Classic and Photoshop and things like that. Now, after a year of using that service, I had really wanted to and tried to use Adobe services, but I kept having issues. It was either with After Effects just breaking and crashing or not saving, same thing with Premiere Pro, or with Illustrator not being able to do what I wanted it to. Overall, it was kind of a nightmare with Adobe services. So I didn't really use them a whole lot. And I just used my previous services, like I still edited in DaVinci Resolve and all that, after that little battle with Premiere. So I ended up really only using Lightroom, not even Photoshop, because I had issues with that too. Now, if you're a content creator and you use Adobe services, that's awesome, you got it figured out. I did not. I had a ton of issues with it. So I ended up just using Lightroom. So the subscription ends a year later, and I didn't need the commercial plan anymore. So I downgraded just to the consumer one. Now, that still included all the services, but it had less cloud storage, and it didn't have multiple users, which at that time was fine, but earlier was not. I didn't need what I needed earlier. So that's what I had. I still, at this time, really wanted to use all of Adobe services. But another year goes past, and I have the same issues. I don't use it. I only use Premiere Pro a couple times for a video, but other than that, it was just, anytime I used the software, it was just terrible to use. I had so many issues. So I never really used it for any projects. Now, during that time, because of the cloud storage Adobe offers, I did not want to use that, because if you use Adobe's cloud storage for all of your storage for your photos, well, if you try to cancel, it's a huge pain to get it all off of it. So I never used Adobe services for storage. But Lightroom, if you still bring photos into Lightroom, Lightroom still syncs with Adobe. Now, that was going on, and it built up to where my whole terabyte of storage was being used, and I couldn't import any photos, and it would just freak out. So at that point, I switched over from Lightroom to Lightroom Classic. And I only wanted to use Lightroom Classic because it's all on device. There's no cloud syncing. I just don't want to deal with Adobe Cloud. I just want Lightroom by itself. Now, at the end of that year, when the subscription ends, I want to just start from scratch. I want a new plan, because earlier with that commercial plan, it had like admin roles and different people, and that kind of got rolled into in a weird way into the standard plan. It was just all messed up with different accounts, and it was just a disaster in the admin control. So I wanted just to delete everything and start off from scratch. I wanted to delete everything off the computer. I was just like, I'm going to cancel Adobe from every single level and just see if I can close out the account and start from scratch with a single photography plan with 20 gigs of cloud storage, just super basic, because that's all I need. I don't need the other services. So I'm just going to go about it. I'm not going to have Photoshop or Lightroom or anything like that for a couple days while I get this all figured out. Now, I tried to delete the services. They expired. I couldn't use them anymore. I tried to delete them. It is very hard to remove Adobe services from your systems. It is hard to delete the account, actually impossible. I can't easily remove them from the computer. Like, see, for example, if I want to remove Creative Cloud from my laptop, I have to find the separate uninstaller from Adobe, download that installer, and then uninstall it, but it still leaves a ton of files there. So, like system files, like they're pointless to me, but they're still there. They're everywhere throughout the operating system. So if I want to just get rid of Adobe, just if I wasn't using it anymore, it's like impossible. You have to go through like Finder and like every window, even after you run the uninstaller. So I ran the installer. I just got rid of everything that I could possibly find. It was not easy. And that got me thinking, like, with Adobe, if you sign up and if you just don't think about the cloud storage, if you use cloud storage for your photo storage and video storage and file storage, all that stuff, and syncing and everything, once you're into Adobe, like, it's impossible to get out. You have to find a way to remove your files from their software. You have to find a way to remove their software from your computer. And once you get all that done, you still can't delete the account. I tried to delete the account, but every time I did, an error came up. And it seemed like if Adobe wanted you to delete your account, like if they knew that you were going to and you did, like they'd allow that to you. And they have a button that says delete account, but it doesn't work. So the account's still there. It still exists. It still is out there, non-renewed. It still has stuff in it. It's all terabyte of whatever photos that were synced with it, which I have access to with that account still, but I just want to delete it, and I can't do that, right? Anyway, so I got everything off of the computer, off of the services. I logged out of everything I could. The account still exists out there, but I'm not using it anymore. Now, signing up for Adobe is a completely different story. Once you sign up, you pay your money, you set up your email and all that stuff, just super easy and fast. Then you download Creative Cloud, and then you can install your software right from the Creative Cloud Manager. Just like install. It's done. So obviously, Adobe could make this a little bit easier to remove, right? But anyway, I got all that set up, and it's just completely from scratch. It's just what I want. Everything's gone. I can just start from scratch, and I'm not going to use Lightroom pretty much at all. I'm only going to use Lightroom Classic. I'm not going to have any more file syncing issues. It's just going to be on device. I'm going to edit from a library, and then I'm going to back up my photos to my other systems. So I'm not going to use Creative Cloud at all. I'm just going to use Lightroom Classic. I wish you could just buy Lightroom Classic, like without this subscription model. Like it's all on device, so it doesn't use Adobe servers. All it just needs is updates. So if I could buy Lightroom Classic for maybe like $300, that would be awesome. And I know that they used to offer that, but they don't anymore. This is $120 a year for photography package, and it has all these different photography apps like Lightroom, Lightroom Classic, Photoshop, and a bunch of other little things. But I don't want even that. I don't want all of that. I just want Lightroom Classic by itself. And I guess I get that, but I get other stuff too. So I wish I could maybe pay even less. If it wasn't a one-time purchase of $300, maybe make it $50 a year just to have Lightroom Classic. Maybe that's an option that I'm missing, but yeah, extremely complicated to delete, super easy to get, but far too expensive. And I wish that there was another software that worked for my workflow, but Lightroom is just so good in some ways. But for what I needed to, it's great. And that's what I'm going to be using in the future, I guess. So congratulations, Adobe. You have a monopoly on the market. So yeah, that's my experience with Adobe. Kind of interesting. So if you're starting off from scratch and you're a photographer and you only want photography things and you're like, I could get all of Creative Cloud for just a little bit more for the first year, don't do it. Just get the standard photography plan with 20 gigs of storage, unless you want cloud syncing, which you can upgrade. But I don't recommend you use cloud storage for Adobe because it's just another way they lock you in to their expensive, overpriced, and somewhat broken ecosystem. So there you go, Adobe. Some things you can work on. But you have a monopoly, so I guess you don't care a whole lot. Okay, that's my little rant on Adobe services and my good but also terrible experience over the past over 2 years. Anyway, now that we're done with all that weirdness with Adobe, let's start off with some more questions just like we did last week. Okay, question from 3 days ago. Can we use C-Log with 1080p on the Canon R8? The answer is yes, it works perfectly fine. I believe up to 180 frames a second. I can check on that. 1 second. Here we've got a Canon R8, and we can do up to 4K 60 in C-Log, but can we do high frame rates in C-Log? The answer is yes. So yes, you can use C-Log in any resolution, any frame rate on the Canon cameras, Canon R7, R8. They're the same, basically the same thing. So yes, you can use 1080p in C-Log. You can also do 4K, and you can also do high frame rates. So that's super neat. Okay, moving on to the next question. Canon R8 or Lumix S5 II? Now, I looked at the Lumix S5 II after that question. I don't know in depth all the cameras that exist. I know of them, of the recent cameras from most recent brands, but I don't know in depth of all of them. If you're asking me a question about maybe Sony versus Canon, I probably know that, but not super well versed in Lumix systems. I looked at that system. It's a little bit more expensive at $2,000, $2,200, I believe, but it offers a bunch of cool things, especially for video. Now, for photography, because of the autofocus advantages with Canon, I would go with Canon if you're just doing photos, but for video, I would go with the Lumix because it offers, I believe it's like ProRes or something like that, but it's a full frame sensor with stabilization, and it offers a bunch of more video features that you'd want if you're doing video. So if you're going with video, I guess, and if you aren't into the Canon ecosystem already, you can go with the Lumix S5 II. If you want good autofocus, that's like really good. I know the autofocus got better on the Lumix S5 II, but if you want really good autofocus for photos, you could probably head over to Canon. But the S5 II is more expensive than the R8, so there you go. It was on sale at the time though, so that's something to consider as well, but so is the R8. Everything's kind of on sale right now. So let's move on to the next question. Rolling shutter is my main concern, but the merits had me convinced. I ordered it and it's on its way. Been using the R10 for burning, but the open shutter is notorious to attract dust. This is true. Hope I make the right decision. Yes, so the R7 was going to be a great advantage over the R10. It's got a higher megapixel. It's got that closed shutter, which is awesome when you're swapping lenses. And it's got a bunch of other cool features like the battery and yeah, it's an awesome option for wildlife photography. If you're in a super low light situation, and if you have, like, for example, an f6 lens, like my 600 millimeter, it's not going to be spectacular in low light, but it's going to be awesome with that extra reach. The next question is, what gimbal would you recommend for the Blackmagic Pocket 6K with the Sigma 70-200 and Sigma 24-70? Now, I would recommend the RS3 Pro for this setup. Now, I have the RSC2, the small compact one, and I have the Blackmagic Pocket 6K with that lens, and I am able to fit it, but only like upside down in a weird angle, so it doesn't really work. You can't use it like a normal gimbal. So the RS3 Pro, or RS2 Pro, I guess, if you want to get the cheaper, older one, those gimbals will work. Probably you might have to get some counterweights, but you should be able to make it in a way that it would work. That setup is kind of ginormous when you think about it, because that lens is very big and heavy. So it will work probably if you get enough counterweights and you do it right, but it will not work on the small ones. So there you go. Next question is about last week's episode. At the end of the episode, I was talking about Artlist and Motion Array as two stock services that I recommend for stock audio, assets, all that stuff. And they were asking, what about Pixpay for people who don't want to pay? Now, I'm just going to take this and say, what about any free audio service? The answer is yes, you can use them, but they aren't going to be as good as the paid services like Artlist and Motion Array. And they probably also aren't going to be offering all the copyright features that those services offer. So for example, if a video gets striked for whatever reason, even if it's not copyrighted music, but YouTube thinks it is, I can just let Artlist know what video title that is, just copy the video URL and give it to them, and they remove that copyright strike. A lot of the free services don't offer that level. Okay, let's move on to the next question. What are some tips for sports videography? And there's two parts to this question, so let's answer that part. For sports, for video, it depends on the sport. So if you're doing, for example, and their example was baseball, you want to capture like the pitchers, you want to capture the runners, basically whatever's happening in the sport. You're probably going to want a zoom lens, probably in the 200, 300, 400 range. The big key when I was doing sports videos, sports photos, is to have a bright lens. If you have an f11 lens, it's going to be super difficult to capture what you need to, especially at night, versus like an f2.8 or an f6 lens. If you have a ton of zoom, like the 600 millimeter, you're going to need an f6 lens unless you're paying, like, what is it, $10,000 for an f4 lens. But basically, for whatever zoom range you're going to want as bright of a lens as possible. And if you are using autofocus in a system, you're going to want fast autofocus. The other thing is to support that system. So because of zoom lenses and the size they are and how long you are out on the field or whatever it is, you're going to want to get some sort of support, probably a monopod. Maybe if you're doing video and you have a big video rig on that you're using, maybe you've got a Blackmagic Pocket 6K on a gimbal and you got like a 70-200 and it's just this big massive setup. You're going to want to get one of those suit things with either the arm or the cable that goes over your head. So support and the lenses is a big thing. The other thing when I was doing it is to shoot in a high frame rate. So for example, if I'm shooting 60 frames a second, I'm slowing it down, that's awesome. And also to pay attention to your shutter speed. Because it's sports and a lot's happening, sometimes I even bump my shutter speed even higher than 180 degrees just because I want to get that sharpness of it. And because they're running so fast and slowing it down, it's nice to have that. So yeah, basically zoom lenses, support, high frame rates, fast shutters. And again, those faster shutters and those faster frame rates are going to affect your low light performance. So you're going to need a bright lens. It's an expensive thing to get bright zoom lenses like that. f2.8, f4 lenses, even f6 lenses are more expensive. But if you're doing it professionally, definitely stay away from those cheaper f11 lenses like that. Like I think there's like an 800 millimeter Canon that's f11. Don't get those for sports video or photos. yeah, just don't. And if you're doing sports photos, it's even easier because you don't need a stabilizer and all that stuff. But you're going to need a fast shutter. That's the thing that first started out. I had my shutter way too fast, like 1/2000th of a second, and my photos were super noisy. But then I lowered it too low, and then I had blurry football players. So keep your shutter speed where it needs to be appropriate to the light, maybe 1/200th of a second at least. But it all depends on your zoom range. So if you're doing a super wide shot, you need less shutter speed than if you're doing a tight shot at 600, 900 millimeters. So it all just depends. I think the biggest thing is to get more practice for sports. The first game I did, it was kind of a disaster. But I guess that's kind of the thing, right? It's more practice, more gear. You get better at what you do. The next part of the question is there on a Lumix Micro Four Thirds camera. So what lenses would you recommend? I first recommended the Sigma 70-200. Now that's a 200 millimeter lens, so it's not all the zoom you want, but because they're on a Micro Four Thirds system, if you get an adapter, not a speed booster, but an adapter, that becomes a 400 millimeter lens, f4 equivalent, I believe. So for the price, it's super cheap. Now, that was a little bit above their budget, so I recommended them a cheaper. I think it was like a 70 to like 300 or something like that. But yeah, 70 to 200 on a Micro Four Thirds system is going to give you that range you want, and a lens like that from Sigma is going to be much higher quality than those cheaper Micro Four Thirds camera. I had a Blackmagic Pocket 4K earlier, a long time ago, and that was a Micro Four Thirds camera. That's the system I originally started out with, and I loved the system at the time. But once I moved on to EF lenses, RF lenses, I definitely see the advantage of full frame glass and of full frame cameras. And I know there's a community out there that loves their Micro Four Thirds cameras. I was a part of that a long time ago. But I see the advantages of full frame, of bigger sensors, of bigger glass. So if now getting into Micro Four Thirds, I don't know if it's the best idea. But if you're already in that ecosystem, that's okay. But personally, maybe go for full frame, or maybe even APS-C. So yeah, let's move on to the next question. Can I get 40 frames a second using the R8 with electronic shutter instead of the 6? Yep, that's just a feature that the R8 has. It's an electronic shutter. Now, there is some rolling shutter, and that's basically where images get slanted if something's moving too fast. That is an option in the R8. I've only used it a couple times. It's there. I know some people use it a lot, but I just don't want to have any issues ever with rolling shutter in my photos. So I only use mechanical shutter unless I need to be super, super quiet. For example, if I'm doing an event and the shutter is too loud, I'll turn on electronic shutter in silent mode. But I really don't like to use that feature. Even though it's really good now, but there's still some rolling shutter, especially if you're like panning too fast, like at all. Rolling shutter is still there. I know it's faster than the previous cameras readout, but it's still there. So yes, you can use it. I don't, because I want that mechanical shutter. But if you're doing sports photography and they aren't moving a ton back and forth, like if they're just like, running towards you or something, then electronic shutter works great. But if it's like a baseball bat swinging really fast, then you're going to have that little slanted bat. But if you're okay with that, you're okay with that, and it works for you. And if it doesn't, you can use the slower shutter. Okay, let's move on to the next question. This one's a fun one. Was your heart pounding when the camera was spinning and walking away? Mine was, haha. Yeah, this was funny. Okay, so what we're talking about is at the end of a short, I spun the camera really hard. I was talking about fluid heads and stuff, and I put the camera on and I just spun it and walked away, and it was just spinning really fast when I walked away. This would be an issue if the system wasn't balanced, but before I kind of measured it where I needed to roughly put it, and it was balanced, so it wasn't going to tip over, but it did kind of look like it was going to. But yeah, that's kind of funny. I get a similar question a lot of times when I'm talking about a sensor, and I have that sensor exposed, and when I'm talking about it, I clean my sensors often-ish, but having an open sensor for just like a couple minutes when you're talking about it in a video is totally fine. They're pretty durable. Just be careful when you're cleaning your sensor to clean it properly with those little sensor cleaner things. They're like the little sticks with a little bar, and you just like go across the sensor and it cleans it. Yeah, be careful when you're cleaning, but yeah, having an open sensor for a minute or two talking about it is totally fine. Just like swapping out your lenses a couple times in a row. Okay, let's move on to the next question. How much does that fluid head tripod cost in total? This is actually the same video. That video did quite well, so I got bunch of comments from it. Yeah, so the fluid head that I normally use from Manfrotto, the whole system's around $400 to $500 depending when it's on sale, and I believe it's the 502 or 504 or something like that. It's the really, really common one. There will be a link in the description below. I love this tripod. I've had it for about 3.5 years. I haven't had a single issue with it that wasn't fixable. Like sometimes if you use a tripod for a super long time, maybe the legs come a little bit loose. You just tighten them right down. But other than that, which is just maintenance, really. No issues with the Manfrotto system. Highly recommend it. If you have a bigger system, though, I have used Manfrotto's biggest tripod. It was like, what was it? It was like their $1,700 one. It was the big one. There were some issues with that. I feel like Manfrotto got a little bit over their head with that system. It was really awesome, but there were some issues with it. So if you're going to need a super high-end tripod for, at the time I was using like a 30-pound camera, 30, 40, 50-pound cameras, I would probably go with Satchler or maybe even, what's the company? Vintech, I think it is. Just some of those higher-end tripods. But if you're looking to buy a system like that, you probably aren't listening to this podcast and spending, $5,000 on a tripod. So yeah, those are those options. But for most people, go with Manfrotto, go with Peak Design. The Peak Design travel tripod is awesome. There's even some other ones that are even cheaper, but Manfrotto is just like an all-around great option in that $400, $500, $700 range. Above that, I wouldn't go. I would go with Satchler if you're spending thousands. But yeah, it's a great tripod. Okay, here's another comment from a other tripod video. I know these are kind of all tripod related, but this is just what was kind of recent in the comment section. They're saying there's no reason to buy a $370 tripod as your first tripod. That's how much the Peak Design travel tripod costs. I would disagree. I've used $60, $70 tripods as my first tripod. As you said, there's no reason to do that. I used it and it was okay, but it really wasn't ideal, and I ended up buying that nicer tripod anyway. So if you're starting out from scratch, I would just recommend you go with what you want from the beginning. Obviously, I want a Red Cinema camera, I want an Arri Alexa, but I can't afford that level. But if you're going to be spending $100 or $200 on a tripod, and you that really nice one is just in reach, maybe save up to get that nicer one that you know is going to be a lot better than those cheaper ones. For me personally, that Peak Design travel tripod has been absolutely fantastic. I wish I bought it sooner. And that's the thing, is I could have saved some money and gone with the cheaper one for longer and then worked up to it. But once I got it, I loved it. And that's the thing. If something is just barely out of reach, it's just slightly above what you can afford at the time, maybe just wait a little bit. Obviously, if you need something I need this month for this trip, and that's all you can get, that's all you can get. But if you're just I want to get into photography, I need a tripod, I can wait a month to get the nicer one, maybe do that. That's what I would recommend, if you can do that. This one's kind of interesting. There are a million videos on this topic. Create something new. All the best. Well, I know there's a lot of different videos on lots of different topics. So this one's, I think, about full frame. I know there's videos on topics, but maybe I hadn't made those videos yet, and they're from my perspective, and it's content that I hadn't covered yet. So I know that there's awesome content on videos, but if I feel like I have something to add to this conversation, maybe my own unique perspective on it, then I will do that, and that's okay. If you don't want to watch it, you don't want to watch it. No hard feelings for me. If you don't like it, you don't like it. But a lot of people, you guys do, from the comments at least, and the likes and everything. But I'll just keep creating content like I always have. When is the best time to buy a Canon camera? Best deals, they say. Okay. Now, I've noticed this. I've been keeping track of the pricing of Canon systems, really of all systems that are in that kind of Canon, Sony, the $1,000 to $4,000 range. The best time to get Canon cameras and Sony cameras, they kind of line up, is in the fall time, so right about now, Black Friday, holiday season, all that stuff. And then in the spring as well, so March, April, May, kind of in that fall, winter, summer area. Middle of the summer, you're not going to get the deals. February, you aren't going to get the deals, but in that spring, fall, winter area, not the beginning of fall, towards the end of fall, beginning of winter, that's the best time to do it. So, March through May, and then, September through December are the best times to get deals, especially around holidays, like Black Friday, stuff like that. Systems are usually off, $200, $150, $200, $300 during those times. So, yeah. That's the best time to get them. Sadly, personally, I have missed a lot of those sales when I buy gear. I just haven't timed it perfectly right, and I've bought systems at full prices. It's kind of sad when you see something go on sale slightly after you bought it, but that's okay. Here's the comment. This lens, we're talking about the Sigma 70-200, does not have 2 stabilization modes. 1 and 2 are, but off is not a mode. I would say that off is a mode. I would rather have a lens that has off as an option than one without it. So for example, if I'm recording like right now with a tripod, I don't want stabilization on. It'll drift slowly around the frame. So off is a great option because it doesn't do that. So yes, there are 3 options. Off is one of them, 1 and then 2. I get your point saying off is not an option, but it is great to have, and I'd rather have it than not. So yeah, just something that I said in my video. That's okay. But yeah, it's great to have another option, even if it is nothing. More is better, right? Anyway, here's another comment about stabilization from a video I did with the Canon R7 and the Sigma 18-35. Their concern is that it doesn't have any stabilization, so for vlogs it might be difficult. Because the Canon R7 has built-in stabilization, it's okay. And honestly, if you're careful enough with your systems, like for example, if you're taking a photo and you've got 3 points of contact, so you got your hand, your other hand, and then your neck or your body down here, you don't really need stabilization if your shutter's high enough. Even for vlog-type videos, you can do without stabilization if your lens is wide enough. So for example, a Canon R8 with a 16mm lens has no built-in stabilization, but because it's just so wide, it doesn't really need it. And you can always stabilize afterwards. But yeah, the Canon R7 with the built-in stabilization in the camera and the Sigma 18-35 work awesome as a vlogging setup. There are some lens clicks that I've noticed from the autofocus, like moving back and forth. There's like a and you can pick it up on the audio sometimes. So maybe get a shotgun microphone. That's what I've used and it's worked well. For vlogging type videos, maybe like a Rode, like a Rode VideoMic Pro, something like that. Or ideally, for vlogging videos, maybe skip the shotgun microphone and get a microphone on you, like maybe a Hollyland Lark Max or a DJI mic or a Rode, Rode Wireless Go 2 or something like that on your shirt. That would probably be better for vlogging type content than a shotgun microphone. It used to be that everyone get the little shotgun microphone on the top of their camera, but nowadays it's better to just get the one on you. If you really want to go high end and not have something visible, you can get a lapel from DPA or something like that with a professional audio recorder. That would sound super good and wouldn't be seen, but it would cost like $1,000. So that's an option. Anyway, moving on. Here's a fun question. How many pixels are in a 35mm frame of film? Now, let's talk about this. Digital media, for example, the sensor in your camera, has 4 photon receptors. There's 2 green ones because green isn't as responsive as the other colors, and then there is a red one and a blue one. And the combination of the light input with those little receptions of the light determine what color that pixel is. You get a ton of pixels in a row and then in columns, and you end up with an image. Film works differently. I'm not going to explain how it works on a chemical level, but basically it's a chemical reaction with the light entering the chemical base in the film, and then that creates an image, which you can then scan and then create a copy of, or maybe even just pass light through that digital film, depending on the type of media. It varies. But that chemical reaction stores that media, that frame, and then you reproduce it with light. Because it's a chemical reaction, it depends on the type of film. So if you're using a cheap film from a super long time ago, it's not going to have that perceptive resolution that newer film has. It all depends on the size too. So for example, bigger film, maybe like IMAX film, is going to have a better, higher perceptive resolution than smaller 8mm film or something like that. So super 35mm film, which is the common film format for a lot of movies other than IMAX and stuff like that, is going to have a good resolution, 4K, 8K-ish. But again, it depends on the film, depends on the scenarios, depends on the glass. It's not a simple factor like mirrorless systems. Like this is a 4K sensor, this is 2160 by 3840. Film doesn't work that way. But there is levels to the quality of film. So you can have better, sharper, clearer film or cheaper, worse film. It all depends. You can get super in-depth to this. You can make a whole documentary on the properties of film. Some people have. There's a great video by Fran Voyager on IMAX film, I can link it down below in the video description. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's down there. Other platforms, go check out the YouTube version. Oh, hey, let's talk about that. This is a video podcast. So if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any other platform, you can check out the video version. I'm in the studio right now. I've got a microphone set up. This is where you're hearing me right now. And you can see me, video viewers, on YouTube. So yeah, go check out the video version. And if you are watching on YouTube, maybe you can add this podcast to your Spotify or your Apple Podcasts or something like that. It helps out a lot. So yeah, there are multiple versions of this podcast, I just want to say. And to you video or audio listeners, I'm sorry that you can't see me. But if you want to see me, check out the video version. Anyway, we can answer some more questions, but we answered a lot in the last episode. And we had that whole Adobe thing earlier today. I don't know how long this episode's going to be. You know what I should do? I should get a clock, and then I could see how long this is going to be. I want it to be like 30 minutes long, and I don't want to overshoot myself and have a 2-hour-long episode because I'm just talking and talking forever, but I don't want to have a shorter episode like last week. 30 minutes, 40 minutes, that's what I'm aiming for. I think that's where we're going to end it for today's podcast. Let me know any questions you have in the comment section down below. Now, as we talked about Artlist and Motion Ray earlier, if you want to sign up for those services and get 2 months for free, your annual subscription, or $50 off, check out the links below. And let me know in the comment section down below any questions or ideas you have for videos. Now, one quick thing before we go, if you're listening on the audio version of the podcast, let me know how it sounds to you. I want to make sure that this sounds great on all the platforms and all the devices. So let me know how this sounds. And if you want to leave a review on this podcast, maybe a 5-star review if you want to, leave that review. I don't have a ton of ratings yet, so that would be awesome. I think that's where we're going to end it for today. As always, let me know any questions you have. And if you want to follow me on social media, on Twitter or Instagram, you can do that as well. Okay, thank you for watching the second episode of the JMP podcast, and I'll see you in the next episode. So yeah. Have a nice week.